Okay, so we are now live on YouTube. So good evening and welcome to the first meeting of the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Task Force for Thursday, June 27th, 2024. The time is now 6:32. Seeing as we have quorum, I would like to call the meeting to order. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So in terms of additions and deletions to the agenda, I circulated an agenda last week. I'm not sure if everybody had a chance to review it, but it was bare bones, so you're not missing too much if you didn't. The only addition that I'm going to add is at the very beginning, we'll do a little round table just to introduce everybody, because there's some familiar faces, but maybe not everybody is completely familiar with one another, and then we'll jump into things. So if I could have just a motion to approve the amended agenda. So I just need somebody to pass that motion. So Rachel, great, thanks. And all in favor? You can just raise your hand if you're in favor. Great, that passes. So we don't have any previous meetings. This is our first meeting, so we don't have to worry about minutes. So with that, we'll move right into item 1, which is roundtable of introductions. So I guess I'll get the ball rolling. So I'm James Nielsen. I'm the heritage planner at the city. I'm also the project manager for this project, essentially on our side. We also, as I mentioned before, have a team of consultants from Stantec who are doing all the study work behind the scenes. So I've been with the city now it'll be 3 years in a couple months now, and really enjoy my role here. And this project has been kind of the baby of mine, I guess, for the last year or so. Prior to this, so I've been doing this for about 10, 15 years now, both in the private and public sector, and worked at the City of Toronto and worked at a couple of different private firms as well before coming to St. Catharines. Grew up here in St. Catharines and in nearby Welland. Don't hold that against me, but it's the truth. And essentially really enjoyed coming back home to work with the city. So I'll just on my screen kind of go around one by one, and you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. So I'll start with Fuad.
Yeah, my name is Fuad Al-Azzam, mechanical engineer. I have like a building in downtown St. Catherine, 132 King Street. I've been there like for last 3.5 years, and before I was working like from home and different like offices. I have like 35 years experience in mechanical engineering design for multi-building. It is commercial, residential, or it is like institutional, everything like we're doing HVAC and plumbing and fire protection design for the city, like permits, and follow up with the constructions and site reviews for all those projects.
Great, thanks, Fuad. John Crawley.
Okay, where do I start? Well, I've been on the Heritage Committee prior to, or after, subsequent to the two committees that we had previously, and I think it's been 10 years I've been a member of those committees. I live in a 155-year-old house now in the Queen Street Heritage District. Sort of semi-retired.
Okay,
Spent 28 years at Loblaw in IT division, and been project manager, consultant in the IT for several years after that. So,
great, thanks, John. Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I'm the executive director here at the St. Catharines Downtown Association. We represent about 700 members within the downtown area specifically. So very grateful for many of them being on the call today. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor McPherson.
Councillor Robin McPherson for the great ward of St. Patrick's, which includes the downtown. It's the only ward. No other part of the city matters. I'm sorry, Carlos. I apologize. Previous to being on council, I was chair of the Heritage Committee for about 10 years.
Great. Stephen. Oh, Stephen, you are muted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name's Stephen Bedford. I'm a community planner by background. This is my second go-round in the city of St. Catharines. I was manager of development in the planning department in the 80s, and I left in 1985 to go to St. John, New Brunswick. And so over my time, I've managed 2 heritage districts. St. John, New Brunswick has a 20-block heritage district, and of course, Niagara-on-the-Lake was my last municipal gig, and people around here are aware of the heritage designations and the heritage district in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I'm on the board of the Downtown Association, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this process can move the move the idea that heritage in downtown St. Catharines is a great way to inspire future development in downtown. And hopefully we can do that together.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Anna?
Hi, my name is Anna Morlicchetti. I own 53 Queen Street. Many people know it as the old Ernest Penner building. And not only do I own it, I've operated a business that I've had in St. Catharines since 1988. And I moved one of my locations there about 12 years ago. And if this is the route to go to, benefit the downtown area, I'm anxious to see, because I've seen, I'm saddened to say that I've seen a decline in the last 4 or 5 years anyways. I'm hoping to get it back to what it was about 12 years ago when I first moved into the neighborhood. I'm anxious for that to happen.
Great. Thanks, Anna. David?
Hi, I'm a local architect. We have offices at 126 St. Paul Street.
Yeah.
Previously, I was chair of the Urban Design Committee in Niagara-on-the-Lake and a member of the Heritage Committee there as well. So obviously, we've been at the St. Paul Street location since 2007. Have seen it go downhill, start to go uphill, and now we're witnessing it going downhill again. So we're obviously very concerned.
Thanks, David. I'm not sure if Robert?
The cat is causing me trouble.
Oh.
My apologies. My name is Robert Speck. I'm on the Arts and Culture, or have been on the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee. I'm currently on the Heritage Advisory Committee. I grew up in St. Catharines, spent my career in Toronto, a number of positions, including Chief Administrative Officer of the Ontario Realty Corporation. And I moved back, and it's lovely here, and it's lovely to be part of this committee. And there's the cat. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. So I'll also introduce Councillor Garcia. Councillor Garcia is not an official member of this committee or this task force, but he is a keen heritage, has a lot of interest in heritage, and so he often attends our heritage committee meetings as well. So, Councillor, I'll let you introduce yourself. Oh, you're muted though.
Thank you for that, James. And before I say anything about myself, I wanted to share with the committee that the task force, I think we have a wonderful task force after listening to the backgrounds, but I want to say that we're very lucky that James will continue to be the lead in this task force, because the city just gave him a big promotion, which was very well deserved. And he has been a wonderful heritage planner. But one of his responsibilities, I understand, is that he will continue to be the lead in this one, which is so critical. So, as he said, I've been involved in heritage probably for over 25 years. I've been on heritage committees before I was a councillor, and I do try to attend all meetings of heritage committees that the city has, as well as arts and culture. So I'm certainly looking forward to hoping that we do come up with a an HCD plan that works for downtown, because our downtown is certainly worth preserving, and I think it will be very helpful for the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. And yeah, I guess the cat's out of the bag. Yeah, I starting next week, I'll be the senior project manager in the planning department. I'll still be involved in this project, and then we will be hiring a new heritage planner, which is kind of nice. We'll have two heritage planners on staff. So I'll essentially, I don't know if we've formally figured out if I'll be supervising them, but I'll be very closely involved still with all the heritage stuff that's going on at the city. So very excited. It's yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in St. Catharines, so I'm happy to be part of it. So we'll had a good introduction. I'm glad that everybody was able to make it tonight. Thanks a lot. I know, a Thursday night before the holiday is not the easiest, but I appreciate it. So we'll kind of move into the next item, which is essentially the nomination of the chair. So as I mentioned today, the chair today doesn't need to do a lot. In the future, the chair would essentially do what I've done so far. I make it easy for our chairs. I type up a script and everything for you to be able to, say what you need to say. And a lot of it is just keeping things moving and making sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, and that people don't go on too long and stuff like that, like I'm doing right now. And so essentially, if anybody would like to nominate themselves, by all means, you're more than welcome to nominate yourself. And then if there are multiple people, we would put it to a vote. But I'll open the floor and see if anybody would like to nominate themselves. Robert?
I would like to nominate Robin McPherson. I think Robin's got an extensive background with heritage, our heritage districts, and I think she'd do a yeoman's job.
Thanks, Robert. I don't know the protocol typically when it comes to these task forces. Is it frowned upon for councillors to be the chair?
I'm going to defer to Carlos on this one. I feel Carlos might know, because I don't know. And thank you,
Well,
Robert. You're very kind.
That is a good question, Robin and James. We may need to check with the clerk's office, but my assumption would be that it would be okay simply because you are an official member of the task force and you're not here as part of a committee of council. You're a member of the task force, so I'm assuming it would be okay, but I'm not positive. So, and I agree with Robert that you obviously have extensive experience in heritage committees and also as chair of the committee. So
if we want to avoid any sort of concerns there, Rachel just in the text nominated Stephen. If he was interested in being the chair, that might be an option. Yeah, Stephen.
Well, I've never, if it deals with a question of whether Robin's able to, I'm certainly prepared to help.
Okay, so unless there are any other names put out there, I think personally I prefer to maybe avoid any sort of issues that may come up, Councillor McPherson. I don't know what the protocol is, and so as long as there's no offense taken, I think maybe it'd be safe to go with Stephen as the chair.
None taken, but thank you, Robert.
Great. So essentially, we'll have a motion go forward right now. Motion essentially that Stephen Bedford should be made the chair of the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Task Force. So we need somebody to make that motion. I assume maybe Rachel would make that. And all in favor? Okay, that looks like it passes. So Stephen, you are officially the chair. Like I said, I'll do most of the duties today, and then we'll set you up for the next time. So first item we want to tackle is I want to make sure that everybody was kind of on the same page in terms of how we got to this point. What is a heritage district? What does this mean? So I've put together a little bit of a presentation. Hopefully I can keep it down to about 15-20 minutes. So I'll do my best. And then once I'm done that, there will be a chance to ask questions. And then I'm going to throw out some questions for the group, and it'll essentially be just a conversation and a way for everybody to talk about their concerns or questions, or just throw out ideas and stuff like that. So let me just share my screen and we can get going on the presentation. Okay, can you see what's on my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And the text is okay? Everybody can read it? It's not too tiny or anything like that? I don't know if there's much I could do about that at this point, but okay. So essentially, this presentation is about the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Task Force. So I just want to lay out some ground rules for everybody. I think all these are very obvious and I don't expect we'll have any issues, but just want to say the goal really is to have everybody actively participate in the discussion and the decision-making process. I'd like for everybody to be open-minded and allow for a variety of opinions to be heard, show respect to all members and city staff, respect everyone's time and allow others to offer their perspective. And what I mean by that is don't go on too long if you have if it's your time to speak, because we want to maybe wrap this up by about 8:30 or so. So I'd like to make sure that we get a wide variety of views. Maintain a high degree of professionalism throughout the meeting, ask questions and seek clarification through staff or the chair. I won't make Stephen have to answer all the questions, so by all means ask me whatever you'd like. Conduct yourself in a manner that will not cause any harm to the reputation or image of the city or the task force. So this is more so outside of this meeting. So, in the future, if anything comes up about this task force, just make sure that you conduct yourself in a manner that's appropriate. Keep your camera on during this meeting so that you're visible at all times to your fellow members. And if you could also keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking and then unmute it when you're called to speak by the chair. So the agenda for this presentation essentially is looking at the role of the task force. How did we get to this point? Why was this path chosen? What is a heritage district? And I'm often going to say HCD in lieu of heritage conservation district because it is a mouthful. So keep that in mind. What might an HCD look like? And then we'll talk about some of the concerns that have come up just in the last 6 months since we've been working on this. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions and discussion. So the role of the task force, and I'm sorry that this is kind of a wall of text, but this essentially comes out of our terms of reference. The task force will operate as a multi-stakeholder group, providing input to consultants and staff regarding the Downtown Heritage Conservation District study and plan, including recommendations for the adoption and implementation of these studies and related bylaws. The goal is not necessarily for the group to come to a consensus, but rather to ensure that a wide range of views are taken into consideration and help to inform and refine the documents and policies prior to submission to council for approval. The task force will provide input from the business community and property owners, discuss ideas and bring up concerns, review the consultant's study and provide feedback, provide input on policies and guidelines if council moves forward with the district plan, review the district plan and ensure that policies and guidelines are clear, easy to understand, and consistent with the vision for the downtown, and make recommendations to council on the study and plan. So how did we get here? So essentially a large part of my job over the last 3 years has been dealing with this project and kind of getting our heritage program kind of in line with a lot of the rest of the province, because for a little while things were rather stagnant in terms of how we were handling heritage and adding properties to our register and being proactive. And so before 2020, the city had about 50 properties on its heritage register. And then from 2020 to 2022, the city added an additional 50 properties in the downtown. And this map on the right is essentially a map of the downtown with, you can see the study area boundary in blue. All the properties in red are listed on our heritage register. All the properties in light blue are designated individually. And then in the bottom left corner, you can see there's a dark blue blob and there's a dark green blob, and those are the Yates Street Heritage District and the Queen Street Heritage District. So those are just on the periphery of the downtown. Essentially being listed on the register only prevented demolition without council approval, but allowed owners to make alterations without heritage permits. So it was a very owner-friendly way of preserving important buildings. And it seemed to be working really well. Owners seemed to, once they understood what it involved, and most people aren't looking to demolish their buildings anyways, they realized, we're never going to have to probably deal with City Hall, so there weren't very limited concerns about this process. And then in 2023, Bill 23 was passed by the Ontario government, and this resulted in sweeping changes to the Heritage Act. So essentially, properties on the Heritage Register throughout the province would now lose their status on January 1st, 2025, which is in less than 6 months from now. This was only recently, a couple weeks ago, extended by the province to January 1st, 2027. An extra 2 years is not a lot. Time moves very quickly, and it's a lot of work to designate properties individually. And so it is helpful, but it's not the answer essentially to our problem. So in response to the Bill 23 changes, staff, myself, attended meetings and seminars with other municipalities and met with other heritage planners to determine potential best practices. The heritage community in Ontario is very tight-knit. There aren't a lot of us doing this type of work, so we do kind of rely on each other to come up with ideas and exchange information and best practices and try to find solutions, especially at a time when these were unprecedented changes to the Heritage Act. We hadn't seen anything quite like this since 2005. And so to have kind of systems in place that were working very well and to all of a sudden see those, change on us very abruptly was quite jarring for a lot of heritage planners across the province. So essentially, though, these changes are going to affect about 35,000 properties across the province. So that's how many properties are going to lose their heritage status at the end of 2027, or sorry, at the end of 2026 on January 1st, 2027. That's a staggering amount. 35,000 buildings is, yeah. So the question across the province then is, how do we effectively protect the most buildings possible in the most efficient way possible? And so staff put forward a Bill 23 heritage strategy to council. This went to council a little more than a year ago. On the right, you can see what would happen if all the buildings that were listed on our heritage register, what this will look like after January 1st, 2027. Essentially, there will only be about 7 or 8 properties in the downtown that will have any sort of protection, and that's because they've been individually designated. And most of these are either public buildings, so buildings like City Hall or the courthouse, or a couple of our gorgeous churches on Church Street. So really, the entire swath of St. Paul Street completely without protection. A lot of our nice buildings on Ontario Street and King, no protection whatsoever. So very concerning. So essentially, as part of this strategy, we proposed a potential heritage district for the downtown to efficiently deal with the potential loss of 100 heritage properties. To study each of these properties individually takes months of research and evaluation and time and effort, and I'm the only heritage planner at the city, at least for now, and our heritage committee is all made up of volunteers. And so to put the onus on them to try to research 100 plus properties is just not realistic. So this was also building on our history of really effective heritage districts. So we have Power Glen, we have Port Dalhousie, we have Yates and Queen, and these have all been in place for quite some time, some of them more than 30 years, and they've all been really successful. I think if you go for a walk down Yates Street or you go for a walk down Queen Street, you'd see that a lot of the buildings are very much intact and in very good condition, and that they're very kind of desirable places to live. And so building on that, council approved the request to begin a study and hire a consultant, and work on the study began earlier this year with Stantec leading the study. And they've done many studies in other municipalities. They've done one in Grimsby, they've done one in Toronto. They have a lot of experience in this area. So I just wanted to show this image. This is actually an image that I've showed to council a year ago to talk about the impact of these changes. This is a postcard from around 1910. This postcard, essentially, if you were to put it up, if you were on St. Paul Street and you put this up in front of you, everything you see in front of you would pretty much be there still, which is pretty impressive. But the fact that none of these buildings have heritage protection means that in 2 years from now, technically, all these buildings could be removed if somebody, bought them and wanted to tear them down. Or, yeah, it's very disconcerting to see this image potentially no longer exist. So in terms of heritage preservation at the city and how we view it here, it ties into things like our official plan. Our official plan has strong policies about heritage preservation. It touches on our culture plan and the importance of heritage and culture working together. It touches on our downtown creative cluster master plan. It touches on economic development and our corporate climate change adaptation strategy. So why was this path chosen? Staff recommended pursuing the Heritage District because it was felt that a potential HCD would protect the most significant properties in the city in the most efficient way at a time when there is the most potential for loss through legislation and development. We know that the downtown is kind of the central area for potential development. We see planning applications come in, and just around the corner from City Hall, there's one of our first condos is going up right now and is almost finished. So we know that development is happening in the downtown, and we know that there's a lot of development pressure there. Saying that, the goal is not to eliminate development. The goal is actually to find a way to meld old with new and create a really vibrant downtown that is really interesting. So The HCD would also be consistent with and contribute to a number of the municipal policies and plans and strategies that I just previously mentioned. It would build on the success of the heritage districts that I mentioned before, and it would enable the city to create a meaningful direction for the future of the downtown. This is probably one of the first chances that we've had in a while to really chime in on what do we want the downtown to be and look like. And the nice thing about the HCD process is we have a very robust public consultation process. So this group is part of that. We had a meeting in April that we had very great turnout for. In fact, we had to start our meeting early and we had to stay late because we had so many people show up. Some of you I saw there, and we had great chats there. We had a survey that we've provided to the public, and we had 125 responses, which was way more than our heritage consultants had ever seen from any other community. So there's a lot of engagement, and a lot of people care a lot about the downtown, and the goal is to get all that energy and kind of create a vision for what the future might look like. Sorry for more text, but the goal also is to include a significant, the public consultation component is really important. And as members of the BIA, this really is key to your future, right? And so this is going to affect you the most. You're the ones that are going to have to, ensure that you're okay with this and that this is something that you believe in as well. And because, you've invested in the downtown and you have a vested interest in its future as well, right? So as much as the downtown is everybody's, because it is downtown St. Catharines and everybody gets to enjoy it, you've been the ones that have been putting kind of the money into it and ensuring that your businesses are operating and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that that everybody is very comfortable, or at least feel good about the input that they've been able to provide into this process. This is also an opportunity to engage with the Indigenous and Black communities whose significant histories are underrepresented in the downtown. We know that St. Paul Street was originally an Indigenous transportation route. The Black community was incredibly important to St. Catharines in the 1800s. It still very much is, but it's not the group that it once was, but there still are remnants of that. And we want to make sure that their stories are told as well. We want to make sure that this gives property owners certainty about the expectations for what growth will look like in the downtown. The hope is that a project like this might improve the quality of storefronts and public realm and downtown revitalization. And ultimately, the goal really is to contribute to the St. Catharines brand by ensuring that St. Catharines still feels like St. Catharines at a time of unprecedented growth. So why was this path chosen? An HCD would not, the goal is not to limit development. The district plan would be created with public input and would adhere to provincial policies, which acknowledge that the downtown is an important area for growth. I think if you go to Toronto, you'll see condos everywhere, but you'll also see a lot of still their older infrastructure and older buildings. And they figured out a way to make it work. And a lot of times it can be done in very interesting ways. And so, previously, prior to being here, I was in the private sector for about 7 years, working with developers on projects essentially that involved, heritage buildings and really intense development. Some of the biggest projects in the province, in fact. And a lot of developers, at least in the Toronto area, have really come to realize how much heritage buildings can be an asset and that they don't necessarily have to be a burden. Freeze the downtown, it would not freeze the downtown in perpetuity. The goal is not to create, a Paris or a walking museum or anything like that. The idea is to be progressive and focus on managing change, acknowledging that the downtown is an evolving area of the city where certain changes are not only expected, but welcome. The goal also would not be to force owners to restore their buildings. I heard that a lot at our public meeting. People were saying, well, I don't want to spend money on, having to do this work. And, that's not the expectation at all. By all means, if a owner wants to do that, then staff in the city, we're here to provide support there. But beyond maintaining citywide property standards, which would be the basic expectation for everybody, there's no requirement to restore buildings. So the goal also would be to avoid putting too many restrictions on all properties. The district study will outline which properties are contributing and non-contributing, and essentially, contributing buildings would be buildings of a certain vintage, buildings of a certain quality. A building built in 1970, not going to be considered a heritage building, at least not from a contributing, non-contributing sense. So the goal would be to make sure it's very clear what properties are contributing, which ones aren't, and making sure that there's a level of consistency there. We can even provide different guidelines for different types of buildings. So for example, we have gorgeous churches on Church Street. It might not make sense for them to have the same guidelines as a building on St. Paul Street. So we can work with that and figure that out. The district plan would also outline what types of alterations could be completed without requiring a heritage permit. And I'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit, because I think that's really important. And I want to also stress, because this was something I heard a lot at the public meeting as well. A lot of people said, we have a lot of homelessness, we have a lot of issues downtown. Like, why aren't we focusing on that instead of this project? And the truth is, if it was a magic solution where we could all just, cut a check and be able to solve all those problems, I think, that would happen. But that's not the case. It's very complicated. There's a lot of different pieces in the downtown that need to come together. To me, I view this as just one piece moving in a positive direction towards a larger goal of improving the downtown. So in terms of what is an HCD, so I'll go over this really quickly. Part 5 of the Heritage Act gives municipalities the ability to designate heritage districts. As of 2020, and I'm not sure what the number is now, it's probably a little bit higher, Ontario contains 134 HCDs. At least 21 cities and towns have commercial heritage districts. That includes Toronto, Ottawa, Oakville, London, Kitchener, Cambridge. A lot of big cities, a lot of small places as well have them. And so I was reviewing the Arnprior HCD plan earlier today. So it's kind of a wide range of heritage districts across the province, but there are communities that of our size and whatnot that are also implementing these types of projects. HCDs are areas where cultural heritage value contributes to a sense of place, extending beyond their individual buildings, structures, and landscapes. According to the Heritage Act, at least 25% of properties in the Heritage District must be considered contributing buildings. And typically, the entire process involves 2 phases, a study phase and a plan phase. And I'll just explain what those are here. So we're currently in the study phase right now. An HCD study essentially involves creating an inventory of properties to identify and evaluate the key historical, architectural, and landscape features in the area. So our consultants actually have a team of people, and maybe you've seen them, literally walking down the street with an iPad, taking photos of buildings, inputting different data into their iPad, uploading it to a server, which is going back to their main office, and they're compiling all this data, all these photos, everything, to essentially create an inventory. It's probably, to be honest, we've never, I don't think, had an inventory like this done for the downtown. So it'll essentially be a snapshot of what our downtown looks like in 2024, which even beyond, it's really handy for this project, but for other projects that we're going to do in the downtown in the future, whatever those may be, having this data is going to be super useful. A big part of it too is conducting historical research on the downtown, figuring out different themes and different eras of development, reviewing the current planning and regulatory context regarding heritage designation, establishing a clear and defensible rationale for the appropriate boundaries of an HCD. So earlier I showed you the boundary and what we've considered the boundary for the study. That doesn't mean that that is potentially the final boundary for the HCD if this happens. Certain parts of it could be cut out, certain parts could be potentially manipulated in certain ways to exclude and include certain areas. It's early days. I don't know exactly how it's going to pan out, but essentially what we've seen so far from the study boundary area, do not expect that that is going to be exactly what it would look like when it comes forward, when the study comes forward in a few months. Another goal, obviously, is obtaining meaningful input and support from local stakeholders, business owners, and residents through effective public consultation. So as I mentioned, we had our April open house, which was really successful. We're going to have another fall public meeting. Not sure what style that's going to be in, but we'll figure that out when we get there. We've had our Engage STC surveys. We had 126 surveys filled out, which is fantastic. We have this group, this Downtown Heritage District Task Force, and then we're currently doing Indigenous and Black community engagement as well. A report to council will go forward in the fall. Not sure exactly what day yet, but it'll be in the fall. And council will then determine whether to proceed to the plan phase. So the plan phase is kind of what's going to determine how this would look, in practice. So it provides a framework for managing change and conserving the historic character of an area. It provides all the policies and guidelines, and those policies and guidelines can be as strict or as lenient as we want them to be. one of the really nice things about a heritage district is we kind of create the rules. The guidelines and district plan can say whatever we want them to say, and there's a lot of flexibility there. And so, if there's certain directions that we want to take with certain types of properties, or in terms of the amount of how strict we want to be with property owners, how lenient, we have the ability to do that. So that's really nice. Like, I think that actually is kind of a really great feature of heritage districts, because I think when everybody thinks of heritage districts, they think, really intense, strict rules, and you can't do anything ever. And that's not the case. That might be the case in some places, but it doesn't have to be the case. So I really want to stress that we are able to kind of create the heritage district that we want to create. As I mentioned, properties can be split into contributing and non-contributing properties based on their quality, and they can even be broken down further to have different guidelines for different types of properties based on type and quality and so on. So just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of the survey that we received, or the surveys that we received. We had, as I mentioned, 126 surveys. I'm just going to take a drink for 1 second. Sorry. So about 105, which I guess would be about 80 some odd percent or 80 or so, 80% of the surveys suggested that historical architecture is unique or special in the downtown, or at least 105 out of 125 people thought that it was important enough to note that as being very important. Some of the other questions, like the landscape features, that we had an opportunity as well for people to fill in kind of what specifically they liked in terms of landscape features or historical kind of associations and whatnot. So I don't have that data on me right now, but I just thought it was interesting that 4 out of 5 people said that the architecture in particular was important to them. In terms of, are you concerned that without adequate protection, the city might lose some of its older buildings? Pretty much the same number said yes, they are concerned about that. How important to you is maintaining the history and character of the downtown? Slightly less said that it was very important, but combined, almost 90% said either very important or somewhat important. Only about 10% said not important at all. And then we posed a question because personally, this is really important to me. I think the housing crisis is such a huge issue facing Canadians, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that housing is something that we need to make sure that we have. And I think there is this kind of view that heritage and housing can't work together. I'll show you later that it very much can. There's no reason why it can't. But essentially, as part of the growth of the downtown and seeing developments happen, how many people are interested in ensuring that older buildings are still part of that development? We had 83 essentially out of 125 said that they would like to see kind of that mix of old and new. So that's probably about 75% or so, I guess, or 66%, which is, I think, a significant number. So in terms of what might an HCD look like, I want to stress it can look how we want it to look, however we want it to look. We can decide what is important to us, so not just as this group, but as the larger community, as staff, as the consultants. There's a lot of input that can go into this, and we can kind of decide like what will this look like. We can decide how strict or lenient we want to be. We can also decide what the process will be for making changes and how that will look in terms of getting approvals and stuff like that, because I think that's a big concern. I also want when I think about this project, even though it's called the Heritage District, I think of it more as a city building project. I realize that all this is being done through the Heritage Act, but it really is kind of this idea of what do we want the city, what do we want the downtown to look like? Like how do we want it to feel? How do we want it to look? What do we think about its economic development? This is just really one small piece of that. And so I want to stress that I think personally that these two ideas can coexist. I think heritage and city building very much, you can do both. In fact, I would argue that, it makes for really interesting downtowns and really interesting projects. And I think, I think about competitive advantage and, what does St. Catharines have that other communities don't have? And I think because we have this we have the opportunity for a very dense downtown. We have the green belt surrounding us. We have no choice but to infill. And I feel like that's our competitive advantage. We have this opportunity to create a downtown that's unlike any other, really, and I think the opportunity to meld old and new can create kind of a downtown brand that would be really unique. And I think it would play off well with what we have next door in Niagara on the Lake, where, they're much more, don't touch anything. We like that we have 200-year-old buildings that have never been touched, and that's fine. But I think it'd be really interesting to have kind of the urban play off of that right next door. And with all the tourists coming into the region and whatnot, I think that can be really interesting. And so kind of want to talk about stewardship and what do we want the city to look like in the future. And to me, when I think of my personal job, I'm the heritage planner right now, but in 20, 30 years from now, there's going to be a different person in my role. And I want them to look back on the work that I've done and not say, what was he doing? And so I think that's really important. And I think that stewardship that can apply to, us living in the downtown and owning properties in the downtown, and how we want to see the future, what we want to see the future to look like. Because right now, we have property owners who are owning these properties, but 50 years from now, 100 years from now, it'll be completely different people. So right now, we're just stewards of the downtown. And so whatever choices we make right now are going to impact what people 100 years from now are going to experience. And I've run into the situation as a heritage planner where I've seen lovely old buildings, which, no longer exist because in the 60s, maybe they had ideas about, we'd rather have parking lots instead of nice buildings, right? So it's choices that we make now are going to affect the future. And I just want people to keep that in mind, I guess, a little bit. I want to also stress that buildings can be assets and not burdens. I've sat at the table with developers, so I've been on both sides. There are developers that get it and they make a lot of money off of preserving heritage buildings and incorporating them into their projects and using them as almost like a card in their hand that they can play and say, look, this is our give back to the community. We believe in this and, we're investing here. I think that's really important. I think that it's very much possible. Having sat at the table in St. Catharines, there are people that are really interested in doing projects like that. And it's something we haven't seen yet because St. Catharines, I think we're still, getting into that kind of boom that we're going to see in the next 10 years. But I think that there are people who view these buildings as assets and not burdens. And I'm hoping that as part of this project, people might start to shift their views and see the properties they own or the downtown as being an asset. And as I've said, we often don't appreciate what we have until it's gone. I think the best example of that, even though it might not win any beauty contests, is the Welland House. The number of people so I started my job here a week after the Welland House burned down. It was almost my first day of work if I had started a week earlier. And the number of people who afterwards told me like, oh, I had my first drink there. I was there with friends. I did this there. There was the spa history, and like, there's so many different stories that people have attached to properties in the city and buildings. And I think, a lot of people would take them for granted, but once the Welland House had disappeared, people thought, oh, it made them think about those memories, right? And now that's gone, right? So I just want to stress that as well, that, that nice postcard picture that we had that I showed earlier, I'd want to make sure that we appreciate that, right? And that we acknowledge that, like, we have kind of a pretty cool downtown. And it would be a shame, I think personally, to lose that. Oh, and look at that. Actually, I threw in a slide after about that. So, like, to me, this is downtown St. Catharines at its best. Like, this is a lovely picture. I think a lot of people, if you saw this photo, you'd think, yeah, this looks like a really nice city to be in. And the idea that all these properties essentially would lose their status and could potentially be torn down or, would no longer be there for future generations to enjoy. Like, to me personally, that I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't putting forward this type of project, right? Because I think that this is valuable to the city. So overall, I'll share my vision, I guess, for what the Heritage District is or could be. To me, that it provides a measured response to change. So to me, the goal would be to create guidelines that are reflective of the quality of the building, stricter guidelines for more significant properties. And when I say more significant, I'm thinking the buildings we all know, right? So, if you're one of the really lovely churches on Church Street, right? And if they came in and said, you know what, we want to put vinyl siding over all of our entire church, I think we would all kind of agree that that's maybe not the best decision because you have a lovely church there. Why would you want to mess that up, I guess, right? So things like that, I think, is really important. But I think we also need to be cognizant that, not every property needs to be treated with white gloves, right? that's just the reality of our downtown. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that, we can be more lenient or have less guidelines for less significant properties. And I think how that plays out, we'll get to there. But to me, I think that's really important. I don't think every heritage building is created equal. And so I don't see why we would have guidelines that reflect that. I'd want to make sure that there is a clear focus on avoiding major negative changes to contributing properties. So, for example, demolitions. And I'd want to make sure that that we avoid changes to significant original elements or buildings. So going back to one of our churches, like St. Thomas, like they have the lovely kind of turret, right? If they came in and said, you know what, we're taking the turret down, that would be something that I would want to say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I think actually, that's too important of a feature for you to remove. Let's try to find another solution to whatever your problem is. To me, that would be the goal. It's more about, finding solutions to problems rather than just ripping things down. I'd want to make sure that whatever we come up with is flexible enough for businesses to operate, change, and adapt as needed. I had somebody ask me a question, well, what if I wanted to convert my bookstore to a restaurant? I thought, great, like that's fine. Like we're really not too concerned about what you do inside your building. And if you do need to make changes to the outside, like let's have a conversation about what that looks like. Odds are I'm probably not going to have very many concerns there, but let's have a conversation about it. And my goal also is to avoid red tape and unnecessary oversight for low and no impact changes. I don't want people to have to come to me to change a doorknob. That's just not, that's not good for anybody, I don't think. I think we need to focus on what's important. And I would hope that whatever comes out in our guidelines would reflect that. We've already internally here in the last couple of years, we've implemented changes to really speed things up from a heritage permit process. Myself and my director have the ability to approve heritage permits within a day, which is, pretty impressive, I think. And at the longest amount of time that anybody could take is about 4 weeks. And that's if they are trying to make really major changes to their building and they need to go to the heritage committee first. So 4 weeks moves really quick. And that's pretty much as long as it takes for that. That's the worst case scenario, I think, for most property owners. But generally we can tackle a lot of changes pretty quickly. And I'd want to see that. I'd want to make sure that staff have the ability to be nimble for the downtown as well. So I kind of just wanted to show a couple examples. I'm sorry, I'm going a little longer than I thought I would, but I think it's just really important to be able to visualize what I mean here. So none of the examples are going to be from St. Catharines because I didn't think it was appropriate really to talk about individual buildings that way. So I'll talk about some of the, maybe in Toronto and Hamilton and some projects I've worked on personally, and just kind of talk about what would be possible. So this is Queen Street in Toronto. I'm sure everybody's walked down Queen Street. It's a heritage district. It's one of the commercial heritage districts in Toronto. Lovely building here, but you can see that over the years, especially at the storefront level, things have really been done differently, right? So, but if somebody came to me and said, I want to do something with my building, what do you suggest I, avoid? I would say, you know what, everything up above the storefronts, like why would you want to mess with that lovely brickwork, right? And so I would say, you know what, let's create guidelines that avoid, covering those up, making changes to those. Because that's really the nice part of the building. And, I've told property owners as well that, maybe you want to make changes now, but the next person who buys your building is probably going to buy it because it looks lovely like this, right? Because it has these features and it has that charm. And so you can see that even at the ground level, though, this building here and this one here have their original storefronts. So those storefronts are about 100 years old. They probably service the property really well. They're recessed, so they're hidden from the elements. They have huge, massive windows that allow people to see inside. Like those are really nice. This guy over here, the Coco shop, at some point somebody decided, you know what, we're going to change our entire storefront. And so in this case, they've been allowed to do modern interventions to it. And I think that's perfectly fine. There's no intention for somebody to need to restore it to the way it looked before. This is still, attractive, and it doesn't deter from the value of the rest of the building. And it allows that flexibility too for a property owner to be able to, make the changes that their business needs, right? So this is just kind of an example of, maybe you can do some work down on the bottom floor, but like, let's keep the important stuff up top and not mess around with a good thing, I guess you could say. So here's another example at U of T, and it's funny, this building here looks very similar to the old Bean Trees building across from the bus terminal, and essentially they built a 3-story addition to the side. We can talk about whether or not this is great architecture, or if you like it or not, or if it fits from a heritage perspective. That's here or there. But the idea still is that they were able to take a heritage building, they built an addition to it. It meets their needs. It's used, I believe, for office space because it's U of T, and it actually it creates this kind of interesting project, right? Like they could have just torn down this building and built a glass box. But I think this is a lot more interesting than what a glass box would look like, right? So I think it preserves the history, but it says, what, we have new uses that we need this for, and I think it does a really good job of blending old and new. This is a project I worked on off the Danforth in Toronto. This is the Temple Baptist Church, so this is an old church building. Not that we have a lot of churches that we would see converted or anything like that, but in this case, the congregation had dwindled to the point where they sold off the property and the new owner decided, I'm going to turn this into residential lofts. So they retained, the bulk of the building, built, a tasteful addition beside it. There's, if we were to go inside, you'd be able to see how they were able to adapt the building. But this is a cool building, right? And I think that this actually adds to the charm of it. And the people who have bought into this building have bought, condos and whatnot because of this. Because it's interesting and because it makes their house unique, or where they live unique. This is a project I just saw. I knew about it before, and then I was in Toronto just a couple weeks ago, and I saw it, so you can see it on the right there. But essentially, this is right at the Eaton Center. This is Yonge and Queen, or Queen and Yonge, and essentially what they've done is they've taken a 4-story building right at the corner, and they've put a little glass hat on top of it. Essentially, a 2-story kind of addition, really tasteful. They're restoring as part of that. It's giving them the opportunity to restore some of the brickwork and everything on the facade, and it allows them to then reinvigorate a building that maybe needed a little bit of work. Because if you had seen this building before, and I probably should have showed you a picture of it from 5 years ago, it was all plastered in kind of aluminum like panels, essentially. It wasn't the greatest look when you would walk up the subway from Queen Street. And so this is actually, I think, a lovely kind of thing that you could do with a building in downtown St. Catharines. If you had a building on St. Paul Street and you have the opportunity, maybe you're able to add kind of a glass addition to it, right? This is a project I worked on in Gore Park in Hamilton. Just a 3- and 4-story. These are from about 1840. Essentially, somebody bought it, decided, what, we need a little bit more floor space. So they added 2 stories to it, essentially. Very tasteful. It still allows for the old part to kind of pop and be what you pay attention to, but it now meets the needs of their business. So they essentially, what they've done is they've combined the floor plates on both buildings, and now it's office space, and they have rooftop terraces and stuff like that. So just a good example of the type of additions and alterations that you can make to a building and still allow it to retain its heritage character. This is one in London. This is Fanshawe College. So kind of similar streetscape actually to what you might find on St. Paul Street. Essentially what they've done is they've retained most of the buildings at the front, and then in behind it, because they do have a deep lot, they were able to build kind of this I think it's about 10 stories, if I'm not mistaken, kind of tower for Fanshawe College. So it's blending old and new. It's still very respectful to the heritage buildings, but it allows for somebody to come, for Fanshawe to come in and invest in the downtown in London. This one I think is really interesting. This is the old Backpackers Hostel on Spadina Avenue. And I used to pass by this building all the time, and it was always in very, very rough shape. And then when I worked at City Hall in Toronto, they got new ownership, essentially. And the new owner, because it was a heritage building, we were able to kind of provide a little bit more advice. And what I would talk about with this is if the area were to be a heritage building, if downtown St. Catharines were to be a HCD, we can't compel people to make good choices or to make better choices, but we can nudge them in certain directions. And so in this case, you have this building that's a little bit in rough shape. We were able to nudge them to that. So we were able to say, here's how you clean the brick off and do it properly. They removed all the brick, or removed all the paint. It unveiled this lovely facade with buff brick and everything. The former storefront, not amazing. It wasn't very nice at all. They modernized that. black accents that worked well with the brick and everything. It just shows that you can retain the old, spruce it up, make it look great, and still do something new and kind of exciting and reinvigorate a building. And actually, these guys have even gone one step further. So when I was Googling this property yesterday, they decided, you know what, we got to go one step further. So you can see the Heritage Building here. They own the property and behind it. They said, you know what, we have room there. Let's see if we can build a tower. So I don't know if this is going forward or if it's just a rendering, but it's still the idea that, there are opportunities for investment and for development while still doing really good things to heritage buildings. And they work, you can say what you want about the architecture and whatnot, but it's the opportunity still to be able to invest in the downtown while doing good things for what was there previously. So I want to jump into some of the concerns that I've heard already, and I think there's some greatest hits, and the same things come up pretty often. So I'll kind of go over those, and I imagine we'll have a discussion about them after this. But a big question that I get is, what's in it for me? What's in it for the property owner? And so I'll kind of talk about some of the things that we have available to us at the city. We have a Heritage Grant program. It's a $5,000 matching grant. Doesn't get you super far nowadays, especially over the last couple of years with inflation going up and the cost of everything going up. But it's there. It helps people make choices with their properties, and it does, have an impact. If a $10,000 project is suddenly a $5,000 project, it influences the choices that property owners make. And so we have that available to us. There's also in the downtown, there's a facade improvement program where you can get $10,000 with an additional $5,000 if you're a heritage property. Both of these programs, I feel like if the Heritage District were to come into place, I think as staff would make an argument that if council wishes to invest in the downtown, a great way to do it would be through these programs and enhancing them. No decisions have been made there, but I think that there's a compelling argument to be made that, a lot more people could be interested in these programs and that there's an opportunity there to do investment through that. Councillor McPherson actually requested a potential tax rebate program. It's currently being researched, so I can confirm that for you, and we'll be coming forward later this year. Don't know exactly when, but finance is working on crunching some numbers for me. Essentially, it looks at, for heritage properties around the city, providing a tax rebate for property owners. It can be anywhere, it can be up to 40%. Not to say that that's what it will be, because that is a very large number when you start adding up the number of properties that we have in the city that are heritage properties. But that's a potential option as well, or a potential carrot to get people interested in preserving their heritage properties and becoming designated. There's also, one of the things that I've talked to people too is people are very concerned about, there's guidelines. It tells you what you can't do with your building. There's people are concerned about property rights and, you're going to make me, not be able to do what I want to do. And I say, yeah, there are some rules that you have to follow. That's kind of how our planning process works, though, in Ontario. We have zoning. We have, there are all sorts of different rules depending on, where you are, what type of property you are. So this is kind of adding just another layer to that, but it's not changing anything in the grand scheme of things because you can't build a factory in downtown St. Catharines. So if you wanted to, you're out of luck. Really though, what I always say to people is, yeah, you can't make changes, but neither can your neighbor necessarily. And so negative changes to neighboring properties, I personally think they can affect property values. They can detract from business. They can create undesirable commercial spaces. I think if your neighbor's attractive, it helps you. And so, and I think there's kind of the rising tide as well, where, if everybody's investing in their properties, then it kind of helps everybody. And so I see this as an opportunity to do that. And then I also think that it contributes to the downtown brand. So personally, I think, and there are studies that show that heritage can be a key part of economic development. We don't have to look down the road in Niagara-on-the-Lake to see, their entire city brand is based around heritage, and it's, the economic driver for their community, right? And it also helps foster a sense of place that benefits everyone. I think one thing I've really come to realize with this project is people really care a lot about the downtown. It more than I ever would have imagined. The number of people who want to see good things happen down here is amazing. And I think people generally like the downtown. They just want to see it get to that next kind of step and next place, but they still want it to feel like St. Catharines. So I feel like this type of project benefits that quite a bit. Concerns about red tape, I completely get it. As the heritage planner at the city, one of my goals has been to make the heritage process as easy as possible for people. I don't want to drag things on for people at all. I think heritage has a bad name because of the red tape, and I think in some communities, things can drag on for a long time, and maybe Stephen can tell us some stories about what's happened sometimes in Niagara on the Lake. But I don't want that here. I think the best way to work to operate is to work with people, find solutions, get people through the process as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And I think as part of this process, we can design a system for the downtown to limit the need for heritage permits, specifically for this HCD. Maybe there's certain alterations that we can permit that you don't need to go for a permit for. Maybe we say only very significant alterations require a permit. Like we have the flexibility to be able to design what that looks like. As I mentioned before, staff already have delegated authority to approve certain heritage permits in all of our other heritage districts, and we can approve them within a day, which is, I don't know very many other things you can do in a day. So also, if it is a major change and it needs to go to our Heritage Committee meets monthly. They only hear applications where there are significant changes being made to the property, and no applicant ever has to wait more than a few weeks really to go see the Heritage Committee. It would have to be really bad timing for you to kind of max out at 4 weeks. But because we meet every month, another Heritage Committee meeting is right around the corner. So people very rarely have to wait. And then as soon as that Heritage Committee is done, that meeting's done, I can provide heritage permits pretty much immediately. So we try to make the process as painless as possible. I like bringing this stat up because I think people are always really surprised about this, because when they hear Heritage Committee, they think, oh no, I'm going to have to be dealing with a group that just wants to say no to everything. Our Heritage Committee in 2022, and I haven't run the stats on last year, I really need to do that, but 2022, the city had 31 heritage permit applications come to the committee, and the committee only recommended denial of 1. So 30 out of 31 went through, and the only one that didn't was for a demolition, which I think is fair. Like, that's their job really, is to protect heritage buildings and ensure that they're not demolished. But the idea that 30 other applications went through with no problem, I think that's really impressive. And I would venture that it's better than almost any community in Ontario, to be honest. Concerns about property values. Completely understand that people invest in their properties for a reason, because property values are important. There have been studies that have been done on heritage properties. 2 major studies, 2000 and 2009, they were done, and it was shown that generally heritage properties, there's no negative impact on the property value of heritage properties. Typically, they perform probably on par or better than other properties that aren't designated. Often there is a very robust market for these types of properties. I can tell you that anecdotally, in my role as the heritage planner, not a week goes by that I don't get a phone call from a realtor or a prospective owner saying, I want to buy a heritage property, or my client wants to buy a heritage property. What does it mean? They just want to understand what it means, and then they go and they buy that heritage property. And if you went up to Port Dalhousie and you see how many people have moved into that area in the last 5 years or so, you'd see that these properties are selling like hotcakes, and they're desirable areas for people to want to live in. And so, because a lot of these buildings have been well maintained, the people who live in them care about their community. They're really proud of the neighborhoods they lived in, and so generally, I found that there have been no issues with people being able to sell their properties for what they want to sell them for. I've actually, in the 14, 15 years, whatever it is that I've been doing this, I've never once had anybody call me and say, I can't sell my property because it's a heritage property. There might be other issues that they have, but it's never because somebody said, this is a heritage property, I can't sell it. It's just never happened to me. And that's just anecdotally. That doesn't mean that that's universal, but that's my experience at least. And then the biggest issue, and I think it's probably going to be a big concern for a lot of people, there's an insurance issue around heritage right now. There's a lot of myths about what it means to be heritage. And I've talked to people in the insurance industry, and I've talked to owners that have had to kind of talk to their mortgage, their insurance brokers about it. And there's this idea around heritage or in the insurance industry around heritage, that if something unfortunate were to happen to a building, that the city would expect that we would want them to build it brick by brick exactly the way it looked before. So for example, the Welland House, right? There's no intention from staff's perspective that the owner of the Welland House would rebuild it exactly the way it looked before. And I feel that way about pretty much every other building in the city. If an owner wants to rebuild something to make it look the way it did, we can work with them and figure that out. But there's no expectation. To me, if a building unfortunately is ever lost, it's lost. Like that's just the reality of the situation. And I don't think generally we want to see kind of fake heritage buildings or buildings kind of harkening back to something that it's not. And so the insurance industry, though, is all about minimizing risk, right? And so they've latched on to heritage buildings as something that can be risky. I personally don't understand it. And people in the heritage field, are all kind of dealing with this issue. And so I will say, though, out of approximately 1,000 heritage properties in the city, this issue has only come up for me 3 times. So there's 997 other heritage property owners that are having 0 issues with insurance. I'm not sure what makes them different, but that's kind of the reality of the situation for me. In terms of how I've tried to help them, because I feel like it is a responsibility. If a property owner is going to designate their property or have their property designated, I need to be there to help support them and allow them to be able to get the insurance they need, or whatever it is. And so I've provided letters in the past to property owners to help alleviate concerns from their insurance provider. Essentially, it's a letter that outlines what the expectations are, and what I just explained to you, that the city does not expect for property owners to have to rebuild their properties brick by brick to make them look exactly as they did before. So far as I'm aware, those have been successful. I haven't been told otherwise, but that's essentially what we've been doing so far to handle that. So I'm sorry that went a little longer than I wanted it to, but I felt it was really important that we kind of go over a lot of those points, because I think some of that stuff will come up, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. I realize we've gone long, and I don't want to keep people too long, but if we can maybe go to 8:30, hopefully that it's okay. And if we ever need to, if we want to meet again, if we feel like we didn't kind of get a chance to have enough of a conversation, I'm quite open to meeting again this summer and making sure that all of our concerns and everything are addressed. But I think for now, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Oh, Anna?
First of all, I want to apologize that my microphone was not turned off. I was not trying to be defiant. I couldn't find it. It disappeared from my screen. So I want to apologize about that, James.
Oh, no, I didn't hear you at all throughout. So
okay.
Don't worry. Yeah.
So I do have, I'm going to spare everyone the time. If I can send it through to you and then it goes to the committee, because I do have 31, about roughly 31 questions. And I think that is far too lengthy to sit in a process like this. However, I do have one quick question, and I don't know if you can answer it off the cuff.
Yeah, I'll try.
So I looked at the graphs that you provided that talked about roughly the 100 people that were very concerned about the area of St. Catharines in your survey. And yes, that's it. Do you know, because I don't remember, I did fill out a survey myself. Do you know what percentage of those people actually lived in the affected area?
So we have stats for that. We broke it down by property owner, business owner, and people who live there. Off the top of my head, I don't know what those are for each individual, for how it breaks down. I can provide that data. That's not a problem, because we do have that data. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was around 30 or so people owned property or lived in the downtown, and about 95, I guess that would make, were inhabitants of St. Catharines.
Okay.
So it was about 25 to 30% of the people were downtown. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'll do is I have 2 other questions, but just again to allow everyone else to speak, I will put them in a form of a list of questions for you, and if you can answer them, great, and then the rest of the committee will be privy to the questions and answers, and that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Rachel, I think.
I just want to follow up from that. That's really interesting that the majority of the people that completed the survey and identified that the historical architecture is what they found unique or special. It gives me a lot of hope that the city will then, as a result, increase the funding available for heritage properties, since the city as a whole is obviously paying attention to that. Just because I know you mentioned some of the incentives that are currently available, but I find personally, and no offense to you, James, I'm not putting this at your feet by any means, but the bucket of funds that is available is almost a joke, if I'm honest with you. You know, the facade improvement one, the maximum amount that can be requested for the whole city is $40,000, which means 4 properties per year, which does not go far at all. And the requirements of what you need to do to be eligible for that grant is quite restrictive. So I would personally, I'm pleased the CIPs are kind of up for review, because I think there's a lot of improvements that can be made to them to make them more inclusive and beneficial to our especially commercial business owners and property owners in the downtown core, where really they should be focused, as opposed to citywide, if I'm honest with you. So that gives me a lot of hope. That's exciting. I would also argue, I love that Robin has brought up the one about the tax break. I think that's an important one too. But I also feel that a next step, maybe not, you know, after this, is that tourism money needs to be then focused on the downtown. Because I think if we're asking our property owners to take this extra step, then we need to show that the city is also taking extra steps to promote it and support those businesses in our downtown as a whole.
No, I think that's great comments, Rachel. So I just wanted to, one interesting thing about the funding, the grant funding, is in my new role, I'm actually going to be sort of in charge of that study, and looking at reviewing that. And the person who runs the CIP program will be one of my reports. So we'll be able to kind of look at. I agree that, you know, that money doesn't get you very far nowadays. And I don't know when that program dates to off the top of my head. Maybe one of the counselors knows, but it might have been back at a time when, you know, that money got went a little bit further. I don't know. But I think, yeah, the idea that only 4 properties a year could take advantage of it really isn't, you know, what we want to see, I think. And I would personally make the argument that, you know, and obviously it's up to council, right, to be able to make those choices. But I think there's a compelling argument to expand that program to invest in more properties in the downtown. So, yeah. Just seeing if hands. Anna?
To Rachel's point, I'm looking at a CIP in the town of Fort Erie. Their grants are like $40,000. For $10,000, even if we stretch it to 15, if it's a designated property, the first 5 to 10,000 is going to go to someone like Fuad before I even get my paperwork to the town. I'm actually not accomplishing anything on the facade of my building at $10,000. I'm not even putting a paintbrush to it, because I now have to present to the town what I'm doing. And if that involves renderings, and if that involves any architectural design, I'm in the hole at $10,000. I haven't even gotten to the city stage. So I think it's very unrealistic for the city to, again, to Rachel's point, to expect us to keep our properties at a certain standard if, you know, if the town is not willing to invest in it, they're putting it entirely on our lap to make sure that we invest in our property. It has to be a cooperative joint effort, or else there's no incentive for anyone. As we can see down St. Paul Street, there's no incentive for anyone to make changes to their facade. It's just not realistic.
Thanks, Anna. Robin or Councillor McPherson?
Robin is good enough.
Okay. Thank you.
Just you know, thanks for the presentation, James. And it was, you know, there's a lot that goes into the district. Just to answer a couple of questions about the grants and so on. So the CIP component for downtown, certainly there is a heritage component, but there also is additional components. So while there is the heritage element, you know, the facade improvement program is one part of, I believe, James, there's 5 different CIP components that businesses, certainly downtown, can access, depending on the work that's being done. And with regards to the amount, that amount used to be 5,000 per building, and that was changed in 2018, sorry. I'm projecting our time. I'm here. 2018, it changed in 2018 to go up to 10,000. And part of why it changed and why the Heritage Committee made the recommendation at the time was because no one was actually applying for the grant. And at that time, you know, people weren't applying. So at that moment, we did increase it. And Councillor Garcia will know better than I with the latest round of the CIP, the last round of updates. But heritage was certainly added as a determinant factor in who received the CIP. So it's not a perfect system by any stretch, but there is, you know, the heritage component for the CIP is just one element. And, you know, and hopefully we'll hear from staff. And I know James is working on it, and as well as finance with regards to the opportunity to provide rebates for those buildings who have commercial buildings, not residential. No, only commercial. With regards to, so that's just kind of a little bit of background. I don't know, Councillor Garcia, if you want to add anything to that, the CIP and the funding. Thanks, James.
Yeah,
Thank you, Robin.
thank you, Councillor McPherson. I think you made some good points. The CIP program does consider a number of factors, heritage being one of them, but I just wanted to comment to Rachel's concern about the total facade improvement budget, and something for James to consider in his new role is that when that grant was started, there were not that many heritage properties like there could be in a downtown district that would require a facade improvement. Certainly in Port Lucie, there weren't that many, and there could have been a few in Yates and Queen, but not, you don't have the commercial district that you have downtown where there could be a lot of opportunities for that. So it's certainly something that should be looked at in terms of what the total budget is there and what the individual grants would be.
Thanks, councillors. So just want to stress that the feedback that we get today, and you know, in all of our surveys and everything, all that is getting fed into the staff report and to the consultants report. So things like funding, like if that's, you know, stressed here, we will make sure that that is in there and that council is aware that this is something that that property owners feel would really help them if it's going to be a heritage district. So really appreciate the comments and the concerns there. It's not an area other than the heritage grant program. I'm not an expert on our CIP program. I'll have to become one, but it's not something that I know a lot about right now. And it is a complicated program. There's formulas, all sorts of things that go into it. But it's definitely something that is on staff's radar as something that needs to be reviewed. And ultimately, you know, putting an argument forward to council in terms of how that looks in the future. So appreciate the comment, Anna and Rachel. That's really good feedback. Were there any other questions about anything in the presentation? Otherwise, I want to jump into some discussion if that's okay.
James,
But
I have a few questions. I just can't find my
no problem. Thanks, David.
hand, so sorry about that.
No problem. Go ahead.
I'll just to add to the available monies. We took advantage of some of the monies available, basically just for general facade improvements back in 2007, 2008. And 9, and basically the values haven't changed at all. So, you know, that's what, 16 years. It's been a lot of inflation since then. You're very good at making things sound really good, and there aren't going to be any problems. And so, and I think maybe if you're in charge, it's true, but you're not going to be here forever. You talk about you gave the example of, say, if one of the churches wanted to take down their steeple or their tower. You know, well, we wouldn't want that to happen. have a project in downtown Hamilton right now where it is a church, and they've basically been forced out of the building because it's going to be so expensive to repair it. And the city has now come along, and they've sold it. But the city has now come along and said, no, we want that building to be designated and to be preserved. But they can't afford to do it. And the people that have bought the land have said, well, we can't afford to do it. So what's going to happen? It's going to sit there and rot, and nothing will happen until it falls down. And I'm sure when the program was started in Hamilton, oh, this would never happen, but it does happen. So that's quite concerning. And you're a bit glib, I think, in saying, "Oh, the insurance companies, insurance is potentially a problem right now," but you have no control over that.
No, I
You
don't.
may be able to write a letter, but if the insurance company says we're not dealing with heritage buildings, we're shit out of luck, and you have no input into that. And so the people that are being confronted with the being forced to be designated, it's a real concern. I mean, I obviously have a concern for, and I want to preserve the historic buildings, and we put a lot of money into preserving our building. I don't think it's made much impact. Hasn't really seemed to have encouraged anybody else along the street to do it. But I do have concerns that these programs get into place and then they begin to grow. New people move in. It's a new fiefdom. They start to institute new regulations and new rules, and eventually it becomes a monster that really has difficulty in being controlled. You seem very happy about about the success of your approvals process. That certainly hasn't been our experience in dealing with the heritage committees in the city. Definitely not. So I think for I just think of Fawad and his building and our buildings along St. Paul Street. They're two different situations, and I think whatever happens is going to have to be dealt on a building or area way, because his building is standalone. The buildings on St. Paul are all linked. Anybody that's bought in there has made the assumption, well, obviously we're not going to tear it down and try to build a tower, but because there's no room for it. That can't happen. But if someone has a building that's a standalone on a decent sized property, there probably was some consideration or thought that perhaps I can develop this property in the future. And now if you spent a lot of money on a property that had no restrictions in the past, and now all of a sudden you're being told, oh, you can't develop that property, you can't tear down that building. That's a huge impact. And it's I guess I've heard people say it's almost like expropriation, but I don't think the city is considering actually paying someone for the mistake they made in buying a building. So I think that's a definite concern from my point of view. So I think that's basically my opinion. I just think there's a real danger of people being negatively impacted, even though they may agree and want to preserve. I think a blanket program has a danger of getting some people or trapping some people when they maybe shouldn't be.
Thanks, David. I appreciate the feedback. Just want to start I apologize if I did come across as glib for the insurance concerns. That's not my intention. What I was trying to convey was that we've had 3 out of 1,000 property owners, and 3 is too many, right? Like that's
but that's
honest.
all you know. That's all you know of them.
Yeah.
Right. I think you'll probably find a lot of people are saying, look, our insurance rates have been doubling and tripling, and it may be because of the heritage or whatever, but they haven't had to come to you. They've just bitten the bullet and paid the bill. So,
and that very well might be the case. I don't know. I'm not sure what every individual owner is going through, right? So we have a heritage property owner on our task force right now. I don't know if they can talk about their experience with it. I don't want to put John on the spot by any means, but so I just wanted to. I take that issue very seriously, the insurance issue. I think that it's people should be able to get insurance for their property. Like I completely think that it's inappropriate that somebody, is denied insurance for any reason, right? So, so I apologize if it came across as glib. That wasn't the intention whatsoever. You spoke to, the idea that, I'm in place. I kind of have this vision for what this could be. I'm not going to be here forever. But what happens 20 years from now? The goal there essentially is like anything, right? It's like our official plan, it's like our zoning, it's it's anything that we do from a city perspective, is making sure that whatever is written and included in plans, guidelines, policies, that it's clear, that it's effective, that it's easy to follow in the future. That's the best you can do. We have four heritage districts that date back to the 90s, and they're still running strong, and they still seem to be effective today. They aren't beasts that are out of control. I wouldn't argue that they are, and so I think we have lessons that we can take from those. I think that with this group's involvement, to help provide guidance in terms of, what you're comfortable with in terms of how those guidelines look in the future. If we get to that point, I think that's going to be really helpful, because I want to make sure that's something that, property owners are comfortable with, right? So that's what the argument that I would make there. And, I don't intend on being in this position 40 years from now. I will be retired and whatnot. So, but somebody's going to be in this position, and I want to make sure that whatever we do is done well and is clear for, whoever's in the future. I think it would be a failure on my part and our part if we didn't, if things weren't done properly and in a clear way. So I think anybody who's good at policy would want to make sure that that's the case. So, and then you're talking about development and kind of, if somebody buys a property and, they're now concerned about restrictions on them. My goal for this, and I think I showed a number of images that were talking about, development and melding old and new and finding solutions. Not every property is going to be ripe for development. That's the case even without a heritage building on it, right? So there's all sorts of different variables that play into this. My perspective is that heritage should really not be an impediment to somebody being able to do something like that on their property. I think there's a lot of solutions. There's tons of examples of people doing really creative stuff. I think it makes for better projects. I think, it makes for more interesting assets that those people own. It's an opportunity to then, tap into a market that's willing to pay a premium for those types of things. That's just my preference or my kind of perspective, and I've seen it because I've sat at the table with developers, and I've sat at the table on the other side as well, where developers have talked to me about projects, and there are people that really like this stuff. And so I spoke earlier to the idea that buildings are assets and not burdens, and I hope that we can kind of get people to see things in that perspective. I realize though that's not going to be the case, and there are people who are going to say my building, should come down, and I want to build a tower there. That's completely, that's their right to think that, right? But in terms of how I think things can go, I think there are solutions that can be found. That's just my opinion though on it. So,
would I be correct in saying that the Heritage District is basically set in? I mean, it's going to happen.
No, not at all.
This committee is not really in a position to say, no, we don't think it will happen. It's sort of a fait accompli.
No, not at all. I don't think I've given that impression at all in this early meeting. But no, the goal really is to get your feedback. I'm not going to sugarcoat any sort of report that says everybody was in agreement and thought that this was the best idea ever. I think that would be doing it an injustice, right? Because council wants to know what everybody thinks. And if I come to them and say, yep, everybody loved it, they are not going to believe me. And so because they know, they've heard people say, you know what, I'm not a fan of it. So no, it's not a, done deal at all. We're going to take all the feedback that we're getting from everybody and let council know what everybody thought, and then council will have to make a decision on whether to proceed. But I'm not looking at this as, do I believe in it? Yes, I think that this is a good way for the downtown to move forward. But doesn't mean that this is what is going to happen. And ultimately it's out of my control anyways. It's up to council. So yeah. Fuad?
Yeah, sorry about it. Thank you very much, James, like for this meeting. Like all your speak, I appreciate it, and all of them comes from the feeling from outside guys. They don't have building inside the St. Catherine. Like all of those you speak about, like opportunity and lovely faces. And like when I bought my building, I did have my question to the city, like zoning, and I asked, like, what can I do in this land? They told me like you can go for 6-story building there, and which I love that idea. And because of that, I bought that land, the building beside it, the parking lot. In this case now, with this heritage community, with heritage like proposing items, this dream is gone. And always when you speak lovely Toronto view, heritage with the new stuff, always you don't feel the pain from the owner side, like how much he need to pay to build that lovely view for you to enjoy it without any money, right? Like I will pay a lot of money from my pocket for somebody enjoying that view, right? And whatever you're doing from the city, you give me 10 or 15,000 or 50,000 will not make any sense to develop that area. Like we are all of us, like we are facing the housing crisis here now, and we try like to help to build like really affordable houses in our downtown St. Catharines. And after that, you are adding a lot of layers and now extra layers to have the old development to escape from St. Catherine and to go away like from the downtown, like to build in anywhere, right? It will be cheaper, it will make more money. Why need to pay like 10 times cost of this, like to build that building? And after that, like I don't have anybody to buy it from me because it will be more expensive and maybe it will not look nice for everybody. I feel like as an owner, I have my voice to say no. And I don't need to go to court, like to say no after I pay a lot of money, like to fight the city. Like from day one, I should have, because I asked the city, and the city, they have their zoning, and they answer me like, yeah, you can build this, this, this. Because of that, I bought my building. Now you are adding this layer, hopefully not. And in this case, like I need to go and fight the city. In this case, I will pay more money. As a small business owner, I will be bankrupt. Honestly, like I will tell you from now, I will be bankrupt. If you need to have all those like downtown St. Catherine small business owner to be bankrupt and they close their businesses, and it's already done. Like few restaurants, they cannot afford a huge expense and a huge like huge prices, like increases for rent or for like expenses. I don't know like what to say. Like it is a really tough situation, especially those days for a small business owner to run the business. And from the property tax, from all those like increasing for the hydro, whatever. And now if any small repair, I need to pay more for contractor like to come and repair it because it's heritage building. It is really tough. It is really concern like for everybody as a small business owner. And I hope like this voice will be heard seriously and to have the rights. Everybody from the owners of the building has the right to refuse it or not. And then another side, like I have talked to so many people like they own property and they love the idea. Like if you are looking for 25% from that sector to be designated, I believe some people, they love to have their building designated. In this case, why you force it like to everybody? Maybe you have some volunteer, like they love their building to be there and they love to have grants, as you said, from the city, and they will go for it. My voice like is to give the ownership the right to say yes or no before any decision made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fuad. Anna?
Sorry, I know I keep chiming in, but
No, it's okay.
I think what I'm hearing over and over again is the reality of it is, and yes, I would like it to be as beautiful as can be and rainbows and kittens. And I work very hard at keeping my building beautiful. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. However, the reality is I did my homework when I first heard about what was going on. And I did, and as I shared with you, James, and now I'll share it to the rest of the group, I did my homework and I did approach insurance agents. And they all said the same thing to me. And I'm not talking like a brokerage where they only represent one company. I spoke to agents that have the ability to insure through many companies. And I think I shared with you the texts from one of them that said, very difficult to find insurance. And if you do find insurance, he put in his text a lot of dollar signs, very expensive, and a lot of hoops to jump through is the exact quote. I then approached bankers who are not in necessarily one branch, but they're mortgage specialists where they represent many banks. I asked them what they thought of getting a mortgage, and they said a lot of banks shy away from heritage homes. And he said the verbiage that is used, and I shared that text with you as well, James, the verbiage that is used by banks because they don't like to touch heritage homes is not in their portfolio, quote unquote. Now, but one thing I do want to be very, very clear on is there is a huge difference from both an insurance and a banking point of view when it goes to being a residential property and a commercial property. Residential property, not as difficult, because they said that the fact that you're going to make changes where you're going to involve the Heritage Committee, very unlikely. He said commercial piece of property, totally different animal. You are going to require more changes from one leaseholder to another leaseholder. You are going to require more changes. You might have the ability to grow because of the zoning into apartments above or inside or below. He said when it comes to commercial properties, insurance and banking plays a huge factor. So what I keep hearing from people like David and Fuad and myself is that we do need to educate the people that are involved in the area that this designation will affect and give them all of the information and give them all of the reality of what it is going to cost them moving forward. Because although you showed us those buildings and they are beautiful, do I think that there could be a marriage between new and old? Absolutely. You gave fabulous examples. One of my questions is, what is the difference between starting a project from ground zero in building cost-wise and starting a building that you have to incorporate an existing heritage home around it? I'm not an architect, but I'm involved in real estate and developing. I can tell you there's a significant difference when it comes to cost. I think what I'm hearing, the people that are not part of the Heritage original committee on this committee, the steering committee, is pretty much the same in that, is it fair for the city to expect us to accept the burden of this financial change moving forward in its entirety? Now, if the city says, hey, we're going to come up with some really good funds for you guys, I'm sure everyone will listen. But all I'm asking, James, for you and the city is to give everyone all of the accurate information before this moves forward. That's all I'm asking. Because I think if everyone had all of the information, I'm not sure that the results of the survey would be the same. And I'm not implying that it was intentionally left out. I think it was because it was such a preliminary survey. I think it was a great starting point. But I think moving forward, before we make any decisions, we have to have a very in-depth conversation of finances, because that's basically what it comes down to. This is a two-prong problem. Financing or cost contributed to this change, and possibly any loss of control of your own property. Those are the two, I think, largest factors that need to be addressed by yourself, this committee, and the city moving forward.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you, James.
Councillor, yep, no problem. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, James. And I wanted to mention, first of all, great presentation, but secondly, I think it's great that you have such a different composition, varied composition of this task force, because absolutely, to the points that were made, as councillors, Councillor McPherson and I want to hear from different people, different opinions, and certainly council as a whole will want to hear that. So we are going to listen to everything. And it's great that we're having all these different opinions, and that will all go into any report that is eventually done. I was going to make 2 quick points from my own experience. I live in a house that's going to be 130 years old, and it's been in a heritage district for 20 some years, and I have never had any difficulty or extras on insurance. But to Anna's point, it's not a commercial property, it's a residential property, so that could be different. The other point that I wanted you to comment on, James, was I think David brought up the point about a standalone property is quite different in terms of their potential and adding restrictions to it. But my sense is historically that the city has already added most of those standalone properties that would be part of this heritage district into the heritage registry, so that they already have a restriction on them in terms of they cannot be demolished without city council approval. Am I correct in that, or?
Yeah, so pull up the map. Is this map here that you're speaking to, Councillor? The map here showing all the listed properties essentially in red.
Right.
Yeah, so as part of, essentially, most municipalities had a far more robust heritage kind of register than we had before. We actually didn't even have a full-time heritage planner at the city really until 2019. So for a community as old as St. Catharines to not have that was very surprising. And so essentially, since we've had a full-time heritage planner, we started adding more properties to our register, which is really just restricting demolition. So it allowed people to be able to make changes to their property. They never had to talk to City Hall. The only time they ever had to talk to me was if they wanted to demolish buildings, and it's pretty rare that people want to demolish their buildings. It just doesn't happen a lot. And so I'm not sure, Councillor, if there's a kind of something about that you want me to address,
Yeah,
but
no,
it is something that
that's what I wanted to point out, that a lot of those standalone properties are already on the registry. That's all.
Yeah, and I'll say that I'm not allowed to speak to any specific applications or anything like that, but I can tell you that there are people who have either are in the process or have gone through the process or starting to go through the planning process for developments that involve heritage properties in the downtown, and they're retaining them and building around them and figuring out solutions. And Fuad, you mentioned your property and the costs of doing something, and yeah, there may be an additional cost. I don't know what type of project you're working with, what other issues you have with your property. I think every property is different. At least that's been my experience, and some have more challenges than others. And that's the just kind of realistic approach to it. And finding solutions, though, to me is important. And that would be my goal as part of this project would be to be able to find solutions for all sorts of properties, and to create policies and guidelines that allow for that to happen. We do have a CIP program that is for development. And it allows for, it won't go into depth about, what that allows for, but it does provide for financial incentives for retaining heritage buildings as part of larger developments. Or the development in Port Dalhousie that is going through is taking advantage of it. And there's a number of other properties in the city and developments. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's hard to speak specifically about certain properties and what's potential and what's possible, but I can tell you anecdotally that there are people, developers in the city who are working towards kind of making those types of projects a reality. So, Rachel, did you have a question? I see your hand raised, but I'm not sure.
Yes, please. Sorry. Just to follow from Anna's comment with regards to commercial property being quite different to residential. Completely the case, whether heritage or not, but I'm sure heritage will just add another caveat to that challenge. I'm wondering, with Port Dalhousie being, I believe, the only commercial district that is designated heritage currently in the city, I wonder if there could be any property owners from that area that, you know, to get different viewpoints that the committee could be connected with, perhaps, just to kind of see how they've handled potentially renos or modifications, or how the Heritage District has impacted them. Would that be feasible?
So, Rachel, you read my mind, because one of my questions to the group was, would it be beneficial if we could have sorry, I'll skip through to, so would it be beneficial to have additional meetings where we can have invited guests? So somebody from the insurance industry, you know, a heritage property owner that explains, you know, what they've gone through, a developer that's worked with heritage buildings. Like I have enough contacts where I could, you know, invite those people in and have a conversation, and they can answer questions, because some of these issues are very specific to very specific industries or very specific, you know, backgrounds. I'm just a heritage planner. I can dabble in some areas, but I'm not the insurance expert or the, you know, developer expert or anything, right? So if we feel as a group that it would be beneficial, I would be more than happy to see if we can invite some of those people and have those conversations. I think it's really important. And I think there's a lot to learn from them too, right? So, you know, I'd be happy to do that though, for sure, Rachel. Thanks for bringing that up. So I mean, one of the questions that I had for the group essentially was kind of what we already touched on. What's your overall feeling about this? So I don't know if there's anybody else that hasn't chimed in that kind of wants to chime in on it, but if you do, feel free. Now would be a good time to do that.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in.
Yeah, go for it, Stephen.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know where to start or where to begin, but I look at the downtown as a very complicated, comprehensive package of development elements that need to be touched in order to move the downtown forward as a economic benefit to the downtown and the community as a whole. And heritage designation is an important. Heritage buildings or attributes are only one element of the many things that need to be touched on to deal with the downtown, to develop the downtown. So, and my head is spinning hearing the questions, and I wasn't part of any of the process to get to where we are now. So when I think about this, my head goes to, we have how the community thinks about our downtown. And being on the board of the Downtown Association, it has really given me some insights. The Downtown Association over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, how long have you been here, Rachel? Has really spread its wings in terms of communication. And we are getting feedback from everywhere about what we're doing. And so one example, which is a recent example, is the Holly Festival that was just on, the event that was just last week or 2 weeks ago. And it attracted people from all over Southern Ontario. 3 years ago, it was little. 2 years ago, it was bigger. This year, it was huge. And it's going to get bigger because people in Southern Ontario heard about the Holly Festival and came to town. And the kind of documented feedback we have on social media is, wow, this downtown is like a real downtown. We love this downtown. This is fantastic. So turning those thoughts or those comments into economic opportunities in the future is a different conversation than we're having today. It's a different element of the conversation of building that package of how we develop the downtown. And it then it rubs off onto the individual properties. If it becomes an economic benefit to own a property downtown where there is some economic energy being built. And you already mentioned how people in St. Catharines as a whole value the downtown. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with that for a moment. I worked in this community in the early 80s, and I'm back again as a consultant. And so I hear that all the time. But I also hear, because I'm on the Downtown Association board, the issues that are being raised by the people that own the buildings. And insurance isn't the only issue. One of the issues we have downtown is we have upper floors that are underused. In many cases, it's an economic issue, but based on building code issues, building code questions. So when I think of big issues, I think about, and just being mentioned in the time I've been involved, one is insurance, and another is the building code. Both are bigger issues in the city of St. Catharines can deal with. But I do think there's a network of heritage planners and heritage professionals that frankly should be dealing with the insurance industry and at least getting a good understanding of what that really is so that they can be proactive in terms of dealing with it. Because the people that we all talk to, the brokers and the agents who say, no, they're not part of the big decision makers. The big decision makers are the guys with the money. And so they're the ones that have to be influenced. And similarly, we have the same issues with the upper floors and the building code. The building code isn't a St. Catharines issue. It's a provincial issue and needs to be managed at that level. So those are kind of just two of the elements that come to developing the downtown. And so how do we move through this heritage district question in a positive way and still move some of these other, or at least find ways, perhaps not for us, but find ways to start pushing those envelopes that are seen as barriers to development downtown that are indirectly heritage related. So those are the kinds of things that make me make my head spin. So in terms of communication, James has talked about a robust communication process. I don't know what that is. What I've seen, with all due respect, is a pretty traditional, normal planning communication process. And if you want to move hearts and minds, you have to go beyond normal planning, public meeting processes. So I'd like to talk to whoever about that kind of situation, because we have to move the hearts and minds of the community outside of the downtown and the hearts and minds and people that own properties downtown. And it's not just hearts and minds, because their hearts and minds are closely related to their pocketbook. So those kind of communications, I think, perhaps, I don't know if they've been communicated, considered in the past, but I'd certainly like to understand better that communication process going forward. So it is, every decision has to move hearts and minds, never mind the planning process. And so the downtown is very much a hearts and minds issue, but it's a pocketbook issue, and we've got to relate the two and deal with both. So it's those kind of questions that come to my mind that I'd like to certainly become more aware of, and whether we do it so one of the questions I was going to ask, what is the staging or the steps of the consulting study? When I read the terms of reference, it talks about 2 meetings of this group as that process unfolds. So when was the plan for us to meet in relationship to the study? So I think there's a whole bunch of elements that I think I would like to see fleshed out in a more comprehensive way, so that the issues that David and Anna and Faoud are talking about can be properly addressed, and the kind of heartfelt love for the downtown in a more community sense that Robin and the people in the Heritage Committee feel, and other people in the community can also kind of understand and move forward, and we move forward together, so that, and I don't know how that is difficult. I arrived in St. John, New Brunswick in 1985, and they just approved a 20-block heritage district. And the energy that was required to deal with the economic issues, the hearts and minds kind of issues, is really quite significant. And so my sense is I'd really like to understand in a comprehensive way how staff and the consultants have envisaged this study, how it relates to the policies in the downtown in terms of development, how it relates to the creative cluster, because they're all integrated. And you can't deal with all at once, but at least we as a group can understand the interrelationships. Because I think you've already heard, and I heard right in the beginning, how appreciative of the qualifications of the people that are around this table right now. We can understand the interrelationships and start to kind of decide what we can bite off now and what we can't, so that this process is a constructive tool to the economic development of downtown, because that's going to help Anna, and it's going to help David, and it's going to help Faoud and all the other people that own property downtown, is figuring out how this can be of economic value without being an economic albatross. And so that, I know that's a big dance that I've just made, but my head is just exploding in terms of how this stuff can be pieced together in a way that this group can understand and provide good feedback to the consultants and yourself and to council.
No, thanks, Stephen. It's very complicated, right? And there's a lot going on. And so completely understand why your head would be spinning. And as somebody who has lived this day pretty much every day for the last year, I've wrapped my head around it, and I completely understand that, what's going on in my head is not necessarily what's going on in everybody else's head, right? So, but I appreciate all of that, and I anticipated that a little bit because I put this question up on the screen. This idea that what additional information can we provide the public and the BIA or business property owners to help inform everyone? And when I say robust, kind of consultation, we reached out to a lot of people initially, and we had a very good turnout for our first open house. It was more than we expected. The surveys that we've received are way beyond what our consultants have received for any other heritage district that they've done. About halfway through the survey window, we were at 60, and I told them that, and their eyes lit up. And then a few weeks later, I had to tell them we had 125, and they were like, "What? How?" They had never seen that before. So I thought we were doing a good job of getting it out there. If there are ways that you think we can improve that, and if it means working with Rachel and the contacts that she has with I'm more than happy to do that. Because I agree with you. It's a hearts and minds project, right? And people have to understand what they're getting themselves into, and I think it's really important that we get out to people as much as possible. Because I don't want somebody, when we go to council later this year for this study, I don't want somebody showing up and saying, "I'm just hearing about this now." because
Yeah.
that just isn't good. And so whatever it is that we can do to be doing better, I'm completely open to ideas and to working with everybody to try to make that happen. This task force that we have here is not typical for heritage districts. It's not something that's done across the board. Some communities have used it, some, a lot haven't. So this is another opportunity where we thought, it's very important that we get direct feedback from a group representing the BIA. And so that's where this group comes in. And we have members of the Heritage Committee to help kind of provide, feedback on how things work from a heritage perspective and whatnot, but the real goal is to get the feedback from people who, where this is going to affect their day to day. So, if there's more we can do, by all means, I'm more than happy to do that and make sure that we can, get out there. But if you have that feedback, by all means, send me an email and or maybe Rachel and I can chat and we can go from there. You talked about, the Heritage Planners Network and the work that we should be doing. And I'm on the National Board of Heritage Professionals, and I'm on the executive for that as well. And I can tell you the insurance issue is something that's being handled, I guess, at a larger kind of, because it is an issue for everybody across the country, basically. It's a complicated issue, and it's not necessarily, we're not a big lobby group, right? And so, we don't necessarily have people, at Queen's Park or at, Parliament Hill, vouching for us and trying to make change and whatnot, right? So we have people who are trying their best, at the National Trust and whatnot, but there's only so much, a group of heritage professionals can do. But I can tell you it's something that people are trying to do. It's just, you can only do so much, right? So one other thing you mentioned, though, I just wanted to touch on was the meeting schedule and how often we be meeting. I left our terms of reference purposely vague because this is kind of I feel like we're going to have more conversations. It's 8:30 right now. I don't want to keep us too much later. I didn't want to say, yep, we're having 3 meetings. That's it. I said we're going to have at least 2. The idea was we have a startup meeting. This is that meeting. We have a meeting when when the report is finally done. Everybody can provide their feedback there. What we do in between there, I am completely open to. If we want to have more conversations, if we want to bring people in to ask questions, because I think that's part of the winning hearts and minds is having people be able to wrap their head around some of those bigger issues that I just don't have maybe the answer for. And so, yeah, if we need to have more conversations, if we have to have more meetings to help flush these ideas out, great. I'm happy to do that. We have time. It's, that's as long as people want to meet and we can get quorum, we can have those conversations. So I'm more than happy to make sure that happens. But what was the other? Oh, you were speaking to the idea of as well integrating policies and talking about like how does the Heritage District tie into larger kind of city planning issues and the downtown and whatnot. I think I circulated the link to our Engage STC page maybe early on about I mentioned that in the sidebar there were a bunch of reports and whatnot that people could read for their interest. One of the reports that was in there was my staff report to council about the Heritage District, basically where I made the pitch for that. It's like a 40 some odd page report, I think, or almost 50 pages or something like that, and it talks about all the different ways that Heritage touches on all the different policies that we have at the city and all the different reports. I literally pulled from everywhere I could. It's probably, I spent weeks writing that report, and it tries to touch on as much as possible because I had to make a compelling argument to council that this is something that matches all of their policies and goals across the board. So yeah, I hope I never have to write a report that long again because it was quite lengthy. But yeah, so I'll circulate that to the group as well in case people missed it. I think it's pretty thorough, or it's as thorough as I could make it, and it kind of ties in, official plan, creative cluster, all sorts of different ideas, and I hope that it helps kind of tell the story about where this fits in. I kind of glossed over it here, like really quickly with that kind of bubble graph that I showed earlier, because it's just too much. I could have done a whole presentation just on that, and that's what I did to council last year. So I don't know if there was anything else that I can chime in on there, but I'll see if there's any other questions. Anna?
Is it possible for you, as long as everyone is agreeable to it, for you to share everyone's email with us so that, to Stephen's point, I don't think something this important and this in-depth can or should be covered in 2 meetings. I think that's being rather unrealistic to think that we can discuss and come to some terms.
For sure.
I think we need to meet and yes, meet, but at the same time, if we can share emails, then my list of 30 plus questions can be answered by you and your staff, which then can be shared with Rachel, and then Rachel can send out to the other participants in the BIA and so on and so forth, because time is of the essence here. And having said that, I do have a question, James. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I may have misunderstood this in one of the earlier slides.
Sure.
Did you say that the Ontario government has pushed this back another 2 years?
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead.
So having said that, what is our rush to come to a conclusion by the end of the year if the Ontario government has given us 2 more years?
So I'll tackle that first, and then we'll tackle the emails.
Yeah.
So no, there is no rush now. Essentially, like we were kind of pressed for time before because there was this deadline of January 1st. But no, we have an extra 2 years now. I mean, our consultants are they're on board, and I mean they have other projects that they maybe have down the pipe coming next year and stuff like that. So we have to be mindful of that. But from a legislation point of view, we do have a lot more time. So these conversations, we're not there isn't a sense of urgency from a the same sense of urgency that we would have had even a month ago. Right.
Okay, so let's keep that in mind so that we make a correct decision instead of a hasty one.
No, and that's a really good point. Thanks, Anna. I appreciate that. And then the bit about emails, unfortunately, because this is a committee, there isn't supposed to be any discussion outside of the committee. So you can send me questions but everything is supposed to be kind of within this committee and made public. There isn't supposed to be anything kind of hidden from public view, and that's why we put this on YouTube, because if somebody wanted to see what we discussed, they'd be able to go and do that.
Sure.
So that's the only thing that I would say about that. And
so how do we get our thoughts to Rachel, since she's got the ability to reach everyone?
Yeah, so you can send, so I'm your staff liaison, so everything can be sent to me, and then I can send, if there's something specific to send to Rachel, I believe I'm able to do that. But we just have to be careful about conversations, outside of this group, because it is supposed to be a public process, and I think it's the most appropriate to make sure that it's public, because I wouldn't want anybody to say, like, down the road, like, oh, there was some stuff going on behind the scenes, and that's just
no. And so then I guess my question is, then how do I get my 31 questions answered if I can't, like, how does the rest of the group know what these questions are and what the answers are?
So you can send the questions to me.
Right.
I'm able to, and one of the counselors might know a little bit more about protocol, but I can respond and provide responses, and we can discuss those in our meeting if I am not mistaken. But if one of the counselors wants to jump in and who knows more about protocol, they're welcome to. Perhaps Robin?
I'm going to say Carlos probably knows more than I as budget chair, because he's the champion of rules. But I believe that you can include the questions in the meeting package as part of the agenda.
Yeah, and we can make that public. Yes.
That can be public. And then all of the answers, or, if there are answers, will be made public. But as James said, I think it has to be a very public process. So
that's a great solution, Robin. Thanks for
thank you. That's
you're
very
correct,
fair.
I think, Robin.
Yeah, because I do want to make sure that this information is, if there are questions, then we can disseminate the answers to everybody. I want to make sure that's done, but I just don't want to do that in a way that's not appropriate. So
and I respect that. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that, because these are the questions that I'm confident every owner would be asking you. So let's just get it out there. Let's deal with it and let's move on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Anna. Thank you. So I don't want to, there's some discussion questions here. Most of them, to be honest, have been covered in a large way. But is there we're at 8:40, so which is a little bit longer than I wanted to keep everybody. But is there anybody that has kind of any thoughts that they weren't able to share? And otherwise, it sounds like we're going to meet again relatively soon. We'll figure out, I'll put some thought into what a potential schedule might look like for the next meeting. I will reach out to some contacts that I have and see if they're able to attend and we can ask them questions, and I'll give them a heads up about what it might involve. And I'll let you know, obviously, in advance, who might be attending and what their background is. And we'll kind of go from there. But I do want this to be a robust process. I want people to feel like, they're able to share their views and that they come away from this feeling like they've said everything they can and we've done everything we can to try to, check off all of our boxes, right? Because I think in the end, that's only going to make this project stronger, whether it's, approved or not, right? So at least we can go to council and say, we tried our best to make sure that all of the questions were answered. So I'll just open it up if there's anybody else that has questions. Otherwise,
I haven't yet.
Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, I just want to bring up a couple of things about insurance. I've got 2 properties on Queen Street that are both roughly 160 years old. I had no trouble with the insurance companies getting coverage, and it's relatively cheap compared to other properties I've had over the years. The only thing I had to do was make sure the infrastructure is brought up to snuff so that it reduces the insurance company's risks, like electrical and plumbing and a roof and things like that. And I can't see a commercial building being too much different unless they're going to have, because they're open to the public more, they might have more liability insurance. But as far as the infrastructure has been resolved, I don't see the problem with insurance. I've never had an issue.
Thanks, John.
Is yours a house? Is yours a residence or is it a commercial building?
There are 2 residential properties.
Yeah, well, that's a difference. I'd just like to address Stephen's comment. I don't think it was, I'm not sure what he meant by it, but he was talking about addressing Anna's and Fuad's and my concerns, and then addressing the concerns of Robin, etc., who had a real love for the downtown, sort of implying that we don't care about the downtown. And I think that's wrong. I mean, I'm a pioneer in this downtown. We were here in 2007, and we picked that building and I renovated it. I wanted because of its beauty and its heritage. But what I want to do, so I'm 100% for preserving the heritage. I just want to make sure that the other side of the story and the concerns are addressed and looked at. I think it's possible to love the heritage and to still have concerns about the process and how it might impact them.
Oh, thanks, David. And I think everybody here is for the same reason, right? We're all here because we care about it. And I don't think Stephen intended anything there. So I think everybody here has the best of intentions. And so, yeah.
Not at all. And I'm sorry David, you took that perspective, because all I was relating is the people that own buildings have, like you say, skin in the game. And so that's a balance that people that don't have skin in the game don't have to make. That's all.
And also, like, we have another owners, like when I reach to other owners, like they have some concern. And I believe if we can send letter the same when you send the property tax, like you have all the owners' address. If you send letter to inform them, like there is public meeting on YouTube or something, they can watch it, because I believe lots of people, they are not aware about this one. Believe me, like I reached like to 10 or 15 owners in the downtown. 9 of them, they don't know anything about this situation.
Yeah, so this task force, no, we didn't widely advertise that this task force was happening. This is kind of like a focal group in a sense, and because it's uploaded to YouTube and it's streamed and it'll be there permanently, we can link to it on our Engage page and say, if you are interested, go check that out. And then when we have communications out with everybody, we will let people know, go to our Engage page. There's a lot more information there. They can check out that link. They can watch our 2.5 hour meeting, and there's opportunities there. So no, we didn't widely disseminate that this was the case, but or that we would be having this meeting. But the real goal of this was to use you almost as a focal group to represent those people. And so yeah, no, I appreciate the comment though, Fuad.
No problem. No.
Oh, Councillor Garcia was leaving. Okay, so I don't think there's any other comments or anything like that. Okay, thanks, Robin. Thanks for attending. So Next steps, I will be in touch with everybody. I will follow up and I will figure out when the next date is that we will meet. I'll do probably the similar thing. I'll ask, what works for everybody. I don't know if, a Thursday evening before a long weekend is the best idea, but I'm glad that we were able to all make it work this time. And hopefully, with summer vacations and stuff like that, we can meet again soon. But I'll do my best to organize that as soon as possible to get it on everybody's calendar. And I want to say that I appreciate everybody's feedback. I know it's a really challenging project. I know that there's a lot of mixed feelings, but that's the goal here. Is to if I wanted to have this be an easy project, I would have made sure that I stacked the deck, right? And so the goal is really to get as much feedback as possible and get different points of view. And I really appreciate it, and I hope that it only makes this project better, whether it gets approved or not. I want to make sure that we go to council with as good of a report as possible, and I think your feedback is really valuable. So no, I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to future chats, definitely.
Thank you.
So with that, we do need a motion to adjourn. All right, Anna, all in favor? That carries. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I'll be in touch soon.